Hello, and welcome to Based on Facts, where fiction and superstition meet logic and scientific facts on WELT 95.7 FM, broadcasting from the Allen County Public Library. My name is Chris Rex, here with my wife Uriah, and today we're going to be debating the Constitution.
Well, we're not exactly debating the Constitution.
Right, yeah.
We're going to be the peanut gallery on other people debating the Constitution.
Most
like
notably,
it's
last night in particular, we were fortunate enough to be able to sit down with some popcorn and some drinks, so to speak, and
the only way to watch an entertainment show.
and
oh wait, that's a serious debate, wasn't it? Sorry.
Oh yes, it was supposed to be serious. All that we could see in our heads was SNL and some of their skits on the whole topic, which was pretty outstanding.
I cannot wait for this weekend to see what they do.
If you haven't seen the SNL skits related to the debates and the presidential election, oh my gosh, look those up. Those are some of the best things I've ever seen. It's right up there with Sweaty Balls and Celebrity Jeopardy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really good stuff.
You know, Alec Baldwin can be kind of a jerk on an airplane. We had that whole quote-unquote scandal. It wasn't really a scandal, but we had that debacle with him. But he has completely outdone himself, and you'll like him again. Right. He did a good job. He's made up for that nasty comment.
Yeah. So, we're kind of taking this as a springboard to launch into this topic that was discussed last night at the debates. And it was kind of talking about some of these issues regarding the Constitution and the Supreme Court justices, because that's been kind of a hot topic lately. And funny enough, it was actually within the first question or two that this whole topic was brought about. And the moderator turns to Clinton and Trump and specifically asks them, where do you want to see the Supreme Court take the country? What's your view on how the Constitution should be interpreted?
And by the way, Chris Wallace was the moderator. I think he did a fantastic job trying to control these two tornadoes. I swear. You have hot weather and, get it? Hot-headed, big ego, hot weather. And then you have all the cold weather, because everyone says she's cold-hearted, and they come together to a perfect storm, natural disaster. But he did a great job controlling these two, did a great job controlling the audience, really cracking down on everyone. Can we have Chris Wallace? Please? I mean, I'll vote for him as president.
Anyway, going back to what actually happened in the debates, we look at how Hillary approached the answer. Okay, and this is specifically what she said. She said the Supreme Court should represent all of us and stand up on behalf of our rights as Americans. I thought that was a great answer. She kind of allowed for the mending of the Constitution in various ways to shape what the American public is right here and now.
Particularly, she emphasized LGBT rights, and she really emphasized women's rights within that statement that she made, that the Justice Department needs to represent not just, she said, the rich and powerful. She said they need to represent everyone, all of us, because we're all America. And I thought it was, we'll get to it a little bit, I thought it was really important that she added the specific LGBT and women's rights. Because, as we'll see, we're going to talk about how the Constitution should be interpreted, whether it should be a living document or literally as the Founding Fathers. We're a different, completely different country than we were back in 1776. And so I thought it was very, very smart of her to use those two particular groups and talking about their rights, because we didn't have those anyway.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So Trump's answer gave a little bit of a different perspective, so to speak. He actually stated that the Supreme Court justices he would appoint will interpret the Constitution the way the founders wanted it to be interpreted.
Oh, and before he said all of that, which actually was answering the question, go Trump for actually answering a question. Yay, you're growing up, we're so proud of you, but not really. Anyway, sorry. The fact that he actually started the answer to that question with, I will choose justice, I will appoint the justice in the Supreme Court people who are pro-life. That was the very first statement. So he didn't do a very good job on trying to say that the Justice Department needs to be unbiased, it needs to follow the law. No, he wanted a pro-life justice system, which it's not about if you're pro-life or pro-choice. what's important is you have a biased Supreme Court already. He wants an entire Supreme Court pro-life. You're completely biased. What happened to some sort of, you have this side and then you have this side equally represented? I thought that was kind of weird that he led with everyone will be pro-life.
And that follows completely with what his running mate Pence has said, funny enough, because that's exactly how Pence has run this state.
And we live in Indiana, so we kind of know Pence personally.
Well, not personally.
Politically, personally.
Sorry.
Personally, politically,
Right.
personally, however you want to interpret that. But we've seen him. He's been in town. So we've seen him and we've seen the product of his work. We've heard him talk in person, so it's as much as you can get to there, yeah.
So, anyway, but yeah, so between Pence and Trump, they are both very, very pro-life, and they are both very adamant about making government fit within their pro-life desires, so to speak. You know, Pence insists on running this state, trying to lord over it and pass all these pro-life types of legislation. And that's the exact same type of thing that Trump is going to do, only at a federal level, at a national level.
And again,
which is terrifying.
And again, you're allowed to be pro-life and you are allowed to be pro-choice. We're not sitting here debating, well, is pro-life constitutional? Is pro-choice not constitutional? Is it constitutional? That is a huge debate, and until a law is passed that actually dictates whether it's all illegal or all legal, you can't sit here and say, well, pro-life is the right choice, so of course the entire Supreme Court should be pro-life. You can't say, well, pro-choice is the right choice, so of course the whole Supreme Court should be pro-choice. You can't, that idea is still up for debate. And until it's been set in stone, aka set on paper and pen in a constitutional amendment, you can't sit here and legally say, this is legally right, this is legally wrong. It doesn't work that way. So it's not about pro-choice, pro-life. It's about the fact that you're having an extreme bias on a Supreme Court that's supposed to represent everyone. Sorry, I'm personally pro-choice, and if I have a whole Supreme Court that is pro-life, I don't feel like I'm properly represented.
Right. And that's part of the thing, is that really when it comes to these high-level political positions, they have to realize that they're not just there to lord over the public and to control them and tell them what to do. That's a monarchy. Okay, that's not a democracy which we live. We live in a democracy because we're trying to help make sure that the people are represented fairly and equally. Okay, so that we don't end up in these positions where we are terribly biased in one direction or the other. We try to cover both sides to some degree. Now, obviously, there are certain topics that we don't do that on, and that's okay. In some cases, and in other cases, that's not okay. And so we're trying to kind of pick and prod and weed out some of these bad sorts of things in government and trying to balance it the way that we think is most progressive for human society and is most conducive to us achieving the future that we want to achieve, not only for us, but also for...
As a nation. As the United States of America. And we do want to, this was talked about in the debate, they do want to bring in, a global vision eventually. They were talking about global energy and things like that, but, we're talking about the United States of America. Who are we? What do we stand for? What are we founded on? All of that was really talked about and touched upon in the debate. And, that's first. We as a country are first. And the only way that we can benefit globally is, you start bringing in other countries, hence foreign policy, blah, blah, blah. But, you sit here and you can't say, well, what if I feel it's right to go around and just murder everybody? Where's my voice of representation that says that's right? It's like, well, no, that's when you get into it's set in stone on pen and paper, murder is illegal. So that's why there's no wiggle room there. It's illegal, there's no debate. And I think, funny enough, it is Secretary of State Clinton's VP, Kane, put it beautifully. He said that he personally is against the death penalty. The death penalty is also a huge controversy. It's just as big as the abortion controversy, but it's not in the direct spotlight right now. funny how controversy kind of spins and everyone takes their turn in the spotlight and everyone's looking at it and said, oh, this is the biggest issue, and really there's a whole line of huge issues that no one wants to pay attention to.
I like to consider it as the wheel of misfortune.
That's actually pretty good. The wheel of misfortune and conspiracy. I guess there's a couple gears spinning each other.
Right.
Is the conspiracy spinning the wheel of misfortune, or is the wheel of fortune spinning the conspiracy gear? I don't know. Funny enough. But he said that he is against the death penalty personally. But when he governed his state, the death penalty was allowed. And he had to sit here and say, well, I'm running this state. Do I uphold the death penalty even though it's against my beliefs? Well, he did, because he said, that's the law, and I am not here to push my beliefs on anyone. I am here to uphold the law. And that is what the Supreme Court has to do. They have to have the law in front of them, not their personal beliefs, putting this visor over the Constitution and reading the Constitution through a goggles of their own belief. You can't do that. That's manipulation of the law. That's a misinterpretation, I will call it, and you'll get into how the Constitution should be interpreted. But however you want to interpret it or not, you can't do it through your own goggles. You have to do it through the entire country. You got to represent every voice. And honestly, when you're reading the Constitution, there is no filter to read it through. It is what it is. And there's a specific clause in the Constitution, which is why I think the Constitution is a living, breathing document, not to be interpreted literally as the Founding Fathers would want it. Amendment 15. They put it in there on purpose. 1776, umpteen years ago. The Founding Fathers said, look, in the future, things aren't always going to be this way. These 7 men were absolutely brilliant. Because back then, if you owned property, if you were wealthy, if you were serving in government, you were the cream of the crop. You were the best of the country in every way. You were brave, you were smart, you had everything that, honestly, I would say the Republican Party values. I'll give it that. But back then, these men were the cream of the crop, the best of the best. They weren't celebrities, they weren't actors, they weren't on theater, things like that for entertainment. They were the best. And they said, look, we know in the future things are going to be different. They're not going to be like we are now. So they put Amendment 15. We can make amendments to the Constitution.
Article 5.
Article 5, excuse me.
Sorry, not Amendment 15.
No. Article 5.
Thank you.
Wow, did I really?
Yep,
Sorry, I'm
yep.
thinking Amendment 14, which actually kind of plays into the Second Amendment. Article 5 says we can put amendments in the Constitution. That's a big deal. That says you can come in here and as the times change, you can tweak this. You can make amendments to help reflect what's going on in your country at the time. Why would they do that if it was supposed to be interpreted literally like it was supposed to be in 1776?
So going back to even how that whole Constitution thing came about, when we typically have conversations about the Constitution, inevitably you end up having somebody sit here and say, well, what would the Founding Fathers have said about this? Or what did they originally intend as far as the direction that this country should be going in? And we have to think about that for a second and think about what is meant by Founding Fathers. And a couple of decades ago, a certain historian laid out 7 of what he really considered to be the Founding Fathers. Okay, so kind of the primes, so to speak, in this particular equation. Because there's a lot of different people, dozens of people that had some sort of influence on the Constitution.
Yeah.
But there are really only 7 that had a huge influence on the actual content of the Constitution. Were actively involved in every single revision along the way. So,
Well, aren't there 27 signatures on the Constitution?
I can't remember how many.
I believe there were 13 colonies, aka the 13 states, and you've got 2 representatives. In 1776, there were 3 representatives for every area. Sometimes there were only 2. Just kind of depends on where you are. Georgia only had 1, funny enough, but some colonies had 1 representative. Some colonies, like Pennsylvania at the time, had 3, and that's how, kind of similarly how we do it, kind of. But these big, more populated states. So then I think it is 27 signatures. I really have to check that number. Don't quote me on that, but it's at least 27 signatures plus John Hancock, the guy who presided over Congress. But out of all of those names, like he said, there were 7 of them that were really really key, and it was Pennsylvania. Benjamin Franklin. You had John Adams from Massachusetts, and then you had Thomas Jefferson, who was Virginia, and it just this list goes on. Basically, these 7 people represented some of the largest areas of the 13 colonies, the most populated, you could say the more important ones, because Georgia was really small and underrepresented at the time. There really wasn't much going on there, but Massachusetts and Virginia and Pennsylvania, huge. The Carolinas were huge. These 7 people were the main influencers of this whole Constitution. They wrote it, they revised it. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, yeah, he was chosen to write the darn thing. He had to write it. Imagine writing a document as important as that today. Well, they do. And amendments and laws and things like that, they're like 400 pages long. We got it down to 6.
So, just to actually physically lay out who the 7 were, I mean, she mentioned about half of them here, but just to list them out for you, it was John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and George Washington. Those are really the top 7 that we consider to be the founding fathers, so to speak.
And even though everyone else was part of the Congress, I'm pretty sure, George Washington, yeah, he wasn't actually in Congress, but being the general of the army and constantly writing to Congress every single day with very bleak and depressing, I guess you could say he was a big influence of the founding fathers. They wanted him to be king, but he said no. That's a pretty big deal.
George Washington, just as an aside, was probably one of the most interesting men in the world. Okay?
No wooden teeth, by the way.
His whiskey was apparently phenomenal. I have yet to try it myself. Definitely need to visit his alcohol plantation.
No, he's got a really great drink that I made last year. What was it?
I don't even remember.
Washington's eggnog. We actually have the recipe for George Washington's eggnog. It's in his diary. It's been authenticated. We made it. That stuff is rocket fuel. Awesome. Great for holidays if you want to be patriotic.
Just don't drink too much. That stuff will light you on fire.
But the key is let it sit. When you make it, you got to let it sit for a week. Don't do 3 days. The longer it sits, the smoother it gets. Anyway.
Yeah, and that really is important. Between the difference of drinking eggnog and drinking eggnog with Everclear. Okay, that's the difference that a week makes, right?
Yeah, you gotta let it sit.
It really does smooth it out. So very important. Maybe we should do that again this year. That'd be fun.
Yeah, it would be fun.
Anyway, so once we have these founding fathers named and labeled, now we can start thinking, well, what did they want from this country? What did they want this country to become, so to speak?
Oh, and one more thing. We talk about the founding fathers being the best of us. It's true. I mean, Franklin was a huge inventor. The stove, electricity, all of that. He was phenomenal. And John Adams is a phenomenal lawyer. He knew, and he was very smart, knew the law back and forth. And all of these men are the greatest of their time. And you have Benjamin Franklin. Y'all know what Benjamin Franklin was like. You say George Washington was an interesting guy. Benjamin Franklin was borderline alcoholic, drug addict, multiple affairs, very loose guy. So, funny how back then, even though these men probably didn't have the greatest moral standards, they were still the most intelligent and they were still the most fit to represent their states. Because when it comes right down to right and wrong, they were nominated and they were chosen to represent their states. That's a big deal because Hillary's got all of this crap against her. Donald Trump has all of this crap against him. But it really comes down to who is actually capable of making those hard decisions when it comes to a person's rights, when it comes to affairs of state, when it comes to running the darn country. Who is most fit? And Benjamin Franklin, despite all of his shortcomings in his personal life, he was the most fit. So just remember that. Sometimes it's not always about your personal beliefs. Sometimes it's not all about what your private life is about. Sometimes it's about who is the most fit and who can make those decisions in the right way.
Yeah. And let's keep in mind that, not trying to make any sort of parallels to me, of course, but Benjamin Franklin was a genius scientist.
Yeah, he was.
Okay. And, it's something that we have to keep in mind along the way, is that it's kind of unusual for scientists to have anything to do with politics. And so Benjamin Franklin was very strange in that regard.
Yeah.
That he did want something to do with politics. Because most scientists would just rather be in the lab for 20 hours straight than ever go before.
Well, I think there's a lot of scientists that
committee.
want to be part of politics. My thing is, I don't think politics wants to be part of science. I think that's how it really goes. I think scientists would love to present their evidence for global warming and for GMOs and for anti-vaccine and get it into the political world and say, these things are safe. GMOs are safe. Vaccines are safe. Global warming is real. They want that in the political area. They would love to be political. Politics doesn't want them. They don't want facts. They don't want truth. And all of these founding fathers were men who sought truth.
Anyway, moving on from there, we get to the development of the Constitution. Okay, they realized that the previous document that they had for the colonies, the Articles of Confederation, just wasn't quite cutting it, and that they really needed something more solid to really firmly place the United States in a foundation that we can really build off of and make what is currently the U.S.
Well, it wasn't just that. All of that was really a statement of, hey, we are who we are completely and totally. I guess, how do you say that? The Constitution isn't just the way that we govern ourselves. It defines us. And after that came the Declaration of Independence, based, with the Constitution. All of this started happening, taking those steps to completely step away from England. And I don't want to sit here and say it declared our independence. That's what the Declaration of Independence did. But that document was the preface to making that happen. You can't have a Declaration of Independence unless you have something that states how you are governed, who you are, and why you are the way you are. That's what the Constitution is. The Constitution is the United States of America. It's us.
It is the force. It surrounds us and binds us and gives us direction.
So who's the dark side and who's the good side?
Well, the dark side is Britain, clearly.
Darn you,
the
Britain.
redcoats, yes. And didn't you see the color of Emperor Palpatine's guards? They were all red, just like the redcoats.
The redcoats are coming, the white coats are coming. Oh, wrong coats. I don't like the white coats.
Yeah.
I don't know, Hillary was wearing white last night. You think she's trying to move into the White House? I'm done.
Or a nice padded room? Hey? Probably not.
You notice that Trump never wears a blue tie? He always has the black suit, white shirt, and red tie because he's got to be very Republican. Anyway, moving on.
America. Moving on, yes. So we have the Constitution. These guys are sitting down trying to draft it. They end up going through about 6 drafts. All right. And fortunately enough, we have all 6 copies. Maybe not necessarily all the edits on those copies that were being actively made as they were editing it, but we have all 6 copies. And they are all on display in Philadelphia at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. So that's pretty incredible. You can go there yourself and actually take a look at them. And that just kind of helps underline how important Pennsylvania was in this whole process. That it really was one of the central areas in the beginning of our country, essentially.
That's why Pennsylvania was one of the few states that had 3 representatives in Congress. Had James Wilson, Benjamin Franklin, John Dickinson. John Dickinson was not for seceding from Great Britain. James Wilson was actually, the defining factor when it came to Declaration of Independence. And then you had Benjamin Franklin, who was more democratic, liberal, however you want to put that term today, because funny enough, Republicans back then are more like Democrats today, and Democrats today can sometimes be more like Republicans back then. It's the values of what makes somebody a Republican, what makes someone a Democrat, it really changes. It's ridiculous how people say, I'm a hardcore Republican. Back then you wouldn't be. I'm a hardcore Democrat. Well, back then you would be. It's funny. Anyway.
Hardcore would kind of imply traditional, and traditional just doesn't quite fit into today's vernacular. So, funny enough.
I wouldn't say that, but anyway.
What we're getting at here is that the Constitution went through these 6 different revisions before getting to the final copy.
No, your midterm paper does not need 6 drafts. It probably is good with 2. It's not the Constitution.
When I'm editing something, it needs about 6 revisions.
Need 6 hours per every revision.
This is true too. But this document, okay, when you think about the length of this document, it started out being 4 pages, handwritten.
Is that like double
Handwritten.
space, 12 font, Times New Roman, or...
Once we typed that up, it was significantly smaller.
Ah.
Okay. But it expanded to be, by a couple revisions in, it was about 4 pages typed up, because that's when we first started typing it up. So we started at 4 pages handwritten, moved to 4 pages typed, and then we expanded that further to 6 pages typed. All right. So this is still not a very large document by any means, okay? If you want to consider something that I just got an email about today, actually, from Verizon Wireless, they sent me an updated privacy policy.
don't you just love those?
And I've never seen a privacy policy that was really any less than 2 pages typed. So when you think about how the Constitution is only 3 times the size of a privacy policy, you start to think, wow, there's really not a whole lot of detail in there.
Try and read Apple's user agreement or updated license agreement. Nobody does that. They just scroll down and hit I agree.
Because it's literally like 50 pages. It takes forever.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Right. But if you want to think about that, you're like, oh my gosh, all they have is a bunch of general statements. And it's like, yes, that's all they have, because they're just forming the framework for the country just to get it off its feet. You know, when you first get a resume and put it out there into the workforce, you're not listing every single thing on it. It's your first time. You're just trying to get yourself out there, trying to have something to hand to somebody that has something on it. Even if it's not all that great. Even though you have revised it a couple times. That's just not the way it works.
Because there's not much to you yet. You don't have
Right.
a lot of experience. You don't have a lot of knowledge. If you're going to school to be, a mechanic. You put your resume out there. There's not a lot of certifications or experience on there. You're as a mechanic, you're very hollow. You're barely a mechanic, and the longer you do it, suddenly the more filled and dense you become. The more filled and dense your resume becomes, and suddenly, instead of being a shadow of mechanic, you are a full-blown color, 4K, Ultra HD mechanic.
And so your resume can literally go from being half a page, which, as far as being a mechanic, just lists your education. Hey,
Yeah.
I went to Ivy Tech, I got this certification. Wow, that's 2 lines.
Yeah.
The rest of your resume is basically your address and your references.
Yeah.
That's it.
But that's how our country is. Back then, we were only 13 states, and really, meh. If you looked at the size and what was really going on, it probably could have been taken down to maybe 10 states. Technically. Because we didn't have that many people. We didn't have that much stuff to us. Yeah. There wasn't a lot to us. We didn't have these... Yeah, I don't even know where to begin. What we didn't have compared to what we do have today. We didn't have internet. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have all of this
We didn't have stovetop stuffing for that turkey.
Oh, yay, stovetop. Thanksgiving. You're not here yet. Let Halloween come first. But anyway, America was just a shell, a shadow of what it is today. And our founding fathers knew that. They knew that this was just the beginning. And how did they know that? Oh, I don't know, because they were well educated from England. And England has a rich history from where it first started coming into itself, and these men know the English history. They know how these countries developed. They studied Rome and Western civilization. They've studied and they've been around the world. They know how this works, and they know that America is in phase 1. So it's very general, very open, and I don't know why I said it was Amendment 15 or 14. It was not an amendment, my mistake. Article 5. That's why they put in Article 5, because they knew things were going to be very, very, very different in the future.
Yeah. And that was one of the most genius add-ons to the Constitution during its revision process, so to speak. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you have 7 people working on one document, you have a situation where not everybody is going to have their individual views tied into that document. There has to be some level of compromise along the way, which is probably part of why there was 6 different revisions before the final copy because everybody was trying to insert their own thoughts and feelings into it, and they had to be mediated by everyone else's thoughts and feelings about it.
And for the record, nobody liked John Adams. You know, you put Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams in the same room, those guys butt head like crazy. You know, they were friends, okay, maybe not the best of friends. They were colleagues. They were colleagues in Congress, and they worked together as best they can. But they hardly agreed on anything. They were ridiculous in the way they debated each other and just ranted against each other. They were not all on the same page by any means. It wasn't just this group of 7 guys. They all thought and said the same things and all agreed on the same stuff, and they just did it. No, these were very diverse men, and they did not agree on most anything, particularly those 3.
Yeah, this wasn't just like, let's meet up once a week for the next month, and let's get this hammered out, guys. We'll meet up for like an hour or 2 each night, and we'll just work on this and get it done. No, that wasn't anything of the sort. This took hundreds of hours, hundreds of man hours to produce. Okay, a lot of tears, a lot of anguish occurred in that particular room during the revision process.
I wouldn't say tears, but there was probably some broken chairs, vases, canes.
Yeah, like I said,
it was
tears.
Not pretty.
Anyway, so very, very brutal process to get this document produced, coming from a lot of different viewpoints, people with very, very different histories and backgrounds and values, and they're all trying to compromise on what they think could be a utopian society that is much better than Britain, because they were so unhappy with Britain and how they ruled the country, how it was a monarchy, how they ruled with an iron fist in some ways. They didn't like that or appreciate that, and they really wanted this country not necessarily be soft, but to be somewhat more tolerant and forgiving compared to Great Britain.
They wanted it to be open-minded.
More open-minded, definitely. So looking more at what happened just as a result of this Article 5, we're looking at them having the foresight to accommodate future generations. To say, hey, what we're putting together is just the I-beams, man. We're just putting together the framework for this house, dude.
Here you go from Benjamin Franklin. Dude, man, it's just want everybody to love each other and get along. Yeah, that was Franklin, by the way.
Poor Franklin.
Total reefer.
Okay. So what we're getting at here is looking at how
no joke. I'm not kidding. That's not just a metaphor. He really was. Okay. He invented the bong. Anyway.
Okay. So we have the structure in place to form this house that will become the U.S. And they put in a specific Article 5 in order to allow for these amendments to come in play to fill in some of the gaps, because they knew that there were gaps in the Constitution. They didn't think that 6-page document was complete by any means. They're just like, you know what, this is good enough. We've covered a lot of different topics from a lot of different ways. Let's just go ahead and put it out there to see how it goes. Okay? And you know, I know this just from the peer review process, to try to publish something in a journal or in a book. I understand that you reach a point to where you're like, you know what, this is good enough.
Oh,
Let's just throw it out there.
There's no such thing as peer-reviewed and unbiased review of anything scientific. You're all bought off by some big pharma or big organic. No such thing as an unbiased scientist. You have so much money that people are paying you to do these studies.
Yeah. I'm still waiting to see the check, funny enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, so we see all these amendments coming into play because we know that there are significant gaps from the Constitution. And that's okay. That's all right. And these amendments did things that you wouldn't normally consider to be amendments. You would have thought that these would have been embedded in the original Constitution, but they weren't. Okay, the original Constitution, I hate to say it, was very biased towards the type of people that wrote the Constitution.
Funny enough.
Okay, so we see a heavy bias towards men that are 21 and over, that are white, and have money, basically.
Own or will inherit property.
Right.
Funny thing about John Adams and the right to vote. Back then, you had to have property, be wealthy, and all of this stuff to vote. And John Adams said, look, in the future, it ain't going to be like this. Everyone is going to want to have a right to vote. Be ready. He saw that umpteen years in advance that it's going to have to change. Hence Article 5.
Yeah, and I guess I should just quote that real quick before I get too carried away with the amendments. Article 5 states that Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution.
So if you ever want to know where we get that 2/3 from, it's from our own Constitution. It was the gift from the Founding Fathers to us that says, look, you might have to change some stuff. Here you go. We let you change it.
And 2/3 is great because it's over half, but it's not quite to 3/4, which is kind of really hard to get. Really hard to get 75% approval.
You wouldn't get anything done at that point.
Right. So they realized that was a problem, so they set the lower limit at half, upper limit at 3/4. Boom, right in the middle you have 2/3. Genius. Absolute genius.
I wonder if they came up with that number based on Congress trying to get anything done in Philadelphia. You know, before the Constitution, all of this started happening, I wonder if they tried to get unanimous or tried to get 3/4 and just it never happened.
You know, they were experienced in politics at the time from the previous political system that was in place with the Articles. So they had experience in politics. They weren't completely green around the gills, so to speak, in all regards to this kind of thing.
Honestly, I would think they were more experienced because these men, they were representing their states, and if they went back, these states weren't the most huge, or, you know, these states kind of had one or two very large cities, and that's where everybody was. So if any of their congressional representatives stepped in, you knew they were there, and everybody knew your business. Everybody. It wasn't a situation where if I went to Massachusetts and they said, oh, hey, who's your representative? Ooh. That happens everywhere in this country. If I go down the street and ask some person, hey, who's the Indiana senators? I don't know. They don't even know! What the heck? Back then, 1776, if you were a representative, everybody knew it. They knew who you were. Everyone knew who Thomas Jefferson was. Everyone knew who Benjamin Franklin was. So they had more experience because not only did they have to sit here and try and appease everyone in Congress to get their point across, they had to make sure that they didn't have some huge mob coming after them in their sleep. Because everyone knew who they were, where they lived, what was going on. So that was real politics. Juggling what the people want versus what needs to be done. And making the people understand what needs to be done. And I don't think that's what happens today. I don't think that our political representatives help us understand why the government does what it does. They just do it and they just whatever. We don't need to know. And I just, honestly, that bothers me. I'm not sitting here saying we need transparency as much as I would love transparency. I also know that the masses cannot be trusted with transparency. Terrible idea. But if the masses are rising up against something, it is our political representatives' job to talk to us and say, look, this is what's going on that I can tell you, and they need to have the freedom to be able to tell us so we can understand why they're doing what they're doing. And back then, they could do that. Nowadays, they just don't.
Well, and, you know, especially with regards to this presidential election, you see certain third-party candidates, not naming any names, Gary Johnson, but
Jill Stein.
they really are quite clueless with regard to a lot of things.
Yeah, and everyone sits here and says, I'm going to vote third party. I don't like Hillary or Trump, so I'm going to vote third party. They're the reason. No. And this is why we're voting who we're voting for. We don't look at the personal lives and all the scandals. We look at what's their campaign, what are they trying to do. I can't sit here and say, well, they're all lies. They're not going to do that. Trump lies, Hillary lies, everybody lies. Oh, what is that from? Everybody Lies. Oh my God, that's from a movie. Gotta come back to that. But the point is, look at what Gary Johnson stands for. Look what Jill Stein stands for. I mean, Gary Johnson thought global warming was about the sun expanding and soon is going to engulf the earth. It just... What? And you're saying this on public television? Not just in an interview where the question surprised you. No, this was a prepared statement. And that's what you're going to go with? Do you know anything? I'm not trying to be rude here, because I am coming off as a little bit rude, but I'm sorry, you're a political representative. You need to know the facts. And he doesn't.
Just watch some episodes of Cosmos, for the love of God.
What's Aleppo?
Just, oh my gosh. just kills me sometimes. The amount of scientific ignorance that comes into play sometimes with these political candidates. Crazy and terrifying, really.
So yeah, no candidate is really worth it. However, there are some that are more qualified than others.
Right. When they start understanding the science and not propagating fear
And quoting the
about that
science properly. And not spreading fear tactics.
And that was my problem with Bernie Sanders, just to go on a side topic, was that he was very anti-GMO, was all about the labeling of every GMO just for the scare tactic of making sure that everyone avoids GMOs at all costs. And that's simply not the way to go about it. GMOs, once you understand them, you start to really gain an appreciation for them, as opposed to fear them and shun them and start banning them.
People need to know what's in their food. They have a right to know what's in their food. Really want me to break down the molecular structure of beef? Because that's all that's in your food. Organic versus GMO. Well, what's in my food? You want to know the molecular structure of each of them because they're pretty darn similar. No, you don't. You're asking here and telling, I want to know what's in my food. If I tell you,
yeah,
that's what's going to happen.
And that's what I think is great. When people sit here and try to have a conversation with me about evolution in particular, they sit here and ask for me to educate them, and it's clear that they're not educated. They don't have a single clue about any of the key terms or words or concepts I'm mentioning.
And they're not interested in learning. He could even, he starts talking about it and they go, well, what's that? He dumps it down a little more, gets a little more basic. Well, what's that? He gets even more basic. He can't get more basic than basic.
Yeah.
And they're just not interested in learning.
And they claim to be experts and completely understand it and just think it's bogus.
Well, maybe they have all of these generals and all of these big important people endorsing them.
Okay.
Because that means, if I have all these people endorsing me, that means I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
No. That means crap. I could know nothing, but the entire world endorses me. That must mean that I know something. No, why am I relying on other people's reputations to beef up my own? I'm the reputation that needs to be worried about, not everybody else's. But I'm trying to divert your attention to all these other people. They say I'm so great, I am just the perfect, I am the best. You need to vote for me because I'm going to destroy China. I'm done. I'm done. Oh.
I'm friends with Rob Zombie on Facebook, so clearly I have the support of the entire music industry on my side.
I have all these ridiculously handsome men, including yourself, on my Facebook, so clearly I must be desirable.
Wow.
No.
That's not how the world works,
No.
unfortunately. But, getting back on our topic here, we were kind of starting to look at how some of these amendments have changed how our political system works. Because it's very, very important to keep that in mind, that our political system, like I said before, was very biased towards men who were white and rich in the first place, and 21 or over. So, not very difficult for the founders of the Constitution to fit in those categories.
They were all just white and nerdy.
Not quite nerdy.
Oh, they were nerdy. They were very, very, very smart. All of them. Very smart.
But
Look
we
at them,
start
they're white
seeing
and nerdy.
some of these amendments actually shaping the Constitution, filling in some of these gaps.
Not just shaping the Constitution, the amendments are shaping our country.
Yeah.
What we stand for and who we are.
Absolutely. And so obviously you have the first 10 amendments. Those were the Bill of Rights. There are a couple of nice little tidbits in there. Not going to mention too many of these amendments, but really when I start looking at the amendments, I see some very, very important ones being listed here. Now, obviously we have the First Amendment, which was included in that Bill of Rights. Very, very important because it was basically establishing the freedom of a lot of different stuff. Okay, whether we're talking about freedom of press, freedom of speech, religion, right to protest peacefully. All those things. Yeah, let's
protest
emphasize.
peacefully, legally.
Yeah, emphasizing those parts because a lot of protests lately have not been doing that. Mm-hmm. But all that was established in the First Amendment, which is awesome. That's great. Funny how that didn't quite make it into the Constitution in the first place, but you realize that, not shortly thereafter, after the founding of the final revision of the Constitution, they realize, hey, there were a couple of important things that we missed.
So honestly, if people sit here and say, well, we need to run this country on how the Founding Fathers started it. First off, When was the First Amendment added? Do you know what year?
I do not recall when the Bill of Rights was added. I know it was very shortly after
Okay.
the Constitution was added, like within 2 years. So I think it was
These people were still alive.
1788,
Yeah. These
I want to
people
say.
were still alive and around. But mind you,
I'd have to look that up.
these Bill of Rights were added after the war. That's kind of important. After the American Revolution, that's when the Bill of Rights came in. We completely seceded from Great Britain, and Bill of Rights came forward. That's where all of this is starting to roll, because in the aftermath of all this, well, who are we? We are now suddenly completely free. The shackles have come off. Who are we? Hence the Bill of Rights. But the original Constitution said nothing about freedom of religion. So I dare say anybody wants to sit here and say this country was founded on freedom of religion. No. That's an amendment.
Yeah.
They didn't care about that. There's a lot of things they didn't care about. But at the same time, even though it did take 6 drafts, the Constitution was a little bit rushed. A little bit. They were trying to pull all of this together, hit all the main points. That's why they put Article 5 in there. So after the war was done, after all this crap was done, they could get back to it and say, okay, let's start doing this. Let's start doing this. We need to address this.
So moving on with our amendments, another amendment that's very famous, especially in this election, is the Second Amendment.
So
funny
tired
enough.
of hearing about this amendment.
The right to keep and bear arms.
There's a little bit more to it than that.
That was the predominant part of the Second Amendment.
And yet it's only a small portion of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, we have a right to keep a completely regulated militia, which is in the interest of state security and for the individual to have... No, let me rephrase that because that's not how it's phrased. It's we regulated militia, which is necessary to defend the free states, and the right to bear and keep arms. There's nothing that says for an individual to bear arms. There's nothing that says for a citizen to bear arms. That's not in there. That's why we're having such a huge debacle. That's why 2008 there was an issue. 2010 there was an issue. 2008 was Miller. I think 2010 was Heller. But that's the big debate over the Second Amendment. If you're not, I'm not talking about the presidential debate and who's for the Second Amendment, who's not, who's trying to take away the Second Amendment. No. The Second Amendment itself is kind of this muggy thing because people are saying, well, what's the implied statement here? What did the Founding Fathers really mean when they said this? Did they mean that, well, we need to have a militia and it's supposed to be heavily regulated, so only citizens of the militia or the military are allowed to bear arms? Are private citizens allowed? There's been a lot of muck of what does this mean, because it's a very basic statement, but it's a very important one. And so at this point, it's now come to the point where it's generally accepted each citizen, each individual is allowed to bear arms. I think that was completely done, I think somewhere in the 90s, and then the whole handgun thing, the sawed-off shotgun, they said that, oh, that's not for a military or self-defense purpose, so that's why it's illegal. That's why a citizen can't have it. Because the 14th Amendment comes in, self-defense and all that, where's that line? And a lot of people, when you talk about the Second Amendment and what is legal and what is our right, you have to bring in the 14th Amendment. Your right to self-defense. Can I use a gun for self-defense? Is that okay? Well, yes, you can, but maybe that's why we don't allow sawed-off shotguns, because you don't need a sawed-off shotgun to defend yourself. That's more of a mass destruction military weapon. People are trying to make that argument with assault rifles. They sit here and say, oh, well, I'm pro-gun. You know, you can have a handgun, you can have a pistol, you can have a shotgun, hunting, whatever. But the second you hit military grade, why do you need that? You don't need that to defend your family. That's a militarized weapon. That shouldn't be in the hands of private citizens. And you start bringing in other amendments that really are directed or directly related to the Second Amendment.
Okay. Moving on with our amendment listing, we hit some very important amendments here that cover the whole process that we're going through right now, relating to voting. Okay. So we can look at Amendment 15, which actually was passed in 1870. It was only at that point that people of color, or people who used to be slaves, could become voters legally.
Kind of messed up.
Yeah. So basically, before
100 years.
For almost 100 years, it was only Caucasians.
Yeah, that's
people
a long
of other races
time.
couldn't vote at all.
A century.
Yeah, almost a century. of that. That's crazy to think about. What's even crazier is to think that it took another 50 years for Amendment 19 to allow her to vote. Women.
And here's something funny, that in the American Revolution, some slaves, they said if you fight for the American Revolution, you'll be freed afterwards. That was a big deal. It's a really big deal. And yet, this freed slave, a citizen of the United States, still couldn't vote for another 100 years.
Yeah. So, very unfortunate. But women were always disallowed because they were always considered to be less educated. And in many cases, they were less educated, absolutely. And so they considered education to be an important part of understanding politics and being able to vote.
Oh, so you're saying that you have to be educated to vote. You gotta have to have some sort of knowledge of what's going on around you, how things work. You gotta actually know something to vote.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Now anybody can vote, and that's, again, kind of the point that John Adams made. You know, these white old guys, property owner, rich people, they could afford the education. You know, it's not just about, oh, you inherited a whole bunch of money and you just blow it living the good life. People who were wealthy back then were wealthy because they were truly self-made, or their whole family was rich and education was important, and that's how they stayed rich. And as the wealthy man in 1776 is very different than a typical wealthy man today. It's very interesting to see that.
Then we see Amendment 24, which was only passed in 1964, which basically said that if you owed taxes, you can vote. That's okay. Before, every point before then, for almost 200 years, you could not vote if you owed taxes. Somehow owing money to the government just removed your right to vote. Because once again, it was geared towards the rich people who were probably paying their taxes.
Rich people pay taxes?
Well, modern day, that's a bit of a different story, right? And then we see in 1971, Amendment 26, which allowed people who were 18 and over to vote. Before, it was only 21 and over. So you had a number of people who were able to join the military, you know, at age 18 or even 16.
They couldn't vote.
And they couldn't vote.
That's messed up.
Until they were 21. So at least we've gotten that down to 18.
Hopefully the drinking age and all of that crap will bring down to 18. I'm sorry, if you can serve in the military, you've got full rights of anybody. No restrictions on you, I think.
A couple other notable amendments I'm just going to quickly list off here because we're running out of time. The 13th Amendment, passed in 1865, once again almost 100 years, allowed for the abolishment of slavery altogether.
Took them long enough.
Okay, so just to back that up a little bit, that was 5 years before slaves or ex-slaves got the right to vote. All right, so it took them 5 years to get to that stage.
That's not too bad. Not too bad.
Not terrible. And then we have the 17th Amendment, which was passed in 1913 and allowed senators to be elected by popular vote, not by the state legislatures.
Kind of takes some of the corruption out of government.
Right. So before you could basically have your governor, which in our case was Pence, you could have Pence sit here and elect anyone that he wanted to as a senator, which would have been terrifying. Terrifying.
It still is terrifying.
So it's great that we're kind of
terrifying.
evolving, so to speak, from that point. That's awesome.
Well, there's that word. As a country, things change. We change. And our Constitution was written in a way that could reflect that, because our founding fathers knew that the things that they were doing, yeah, it was a framework, but they wanted things to be changed. When they signed the Declaration of Independence, that almost didn't happen because of slavery. And it wasn't just slavery, it was also marketing, you know, this price can't go above that versus this, there was some of that. But yeah, and the founding fathers knew that they weren't perfect, that they didn't have all the answers, and that eventually some of these things that they want to change now but can't, things that they should change but can't because there are other bigger fish to fry, they left it open so that the government could do right by their country. And that bigotry and discrimination and things that were really going on in a much worse capacity than they are today, they could be wronged. Right. All the wrongs would be right,
yes.
And everything would balance out. They weren't perfect, and they knew it, and they wanted to leave room for us to grow and be better than they were.
So speaking of wrongs, Clinton was great about bringing this up in last night's debate. I'm just going to quickly mention this because she actually went on to kind of poke fun at the whole current predicament that President Obama is going through as far as the appointment of a Supreme Court justice. All right, she actually said this during the debate. She said, "That's the way the Constitution fundamentally should operate. The president nominates and then nominates a Supreme Court justice, and then the Senate advises and consents or not, but they go forward with that process."
They don't just sit there and go,
yeah, and just sit there and twiddle their thumbs.
I didn't hear anything.
Right. And so that's what's going on right now in Congress or in the Senate, is that they're literally blocking this whole process to nominate a new Supreme Court justice, which is
on purpose. That is a violation of our
right.
Constitution. Couldn't Obama sue the Senate?
And this was all laid down in the original Constitution. Article 2 specifically said that the president shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint judges of the Supreme Court.
With the consent or not the consent.
Right. So he's the one that does it. All right. He's the one that nominates these people. It's not down to anyone else. So what's great is going on online here and finding Republican senators like John McCain, unfortunately, of Arizona, sitting here and promising that the Senate will be united against, as far as the Republican Senate, will be united against any Supreme Court nominee that Hillary Clinton, if she were president, would put up.
So sitting here violating our Constitution.
Right. And that's ironic because aren't Republicans the ones that are always saying they want to uphold the Constitution? And this was in the fundamental final draft of the Constitution. This isn't any amendment. Okay, this was something they put in the very first document that was laid down for the country in the Constitution. That this process should go forward like this. And these Republicans are sitting here blocking this process and promising to block this process should a Democrat like Hillary come into office. And that's just outstandingly ridiculous. Ridiculous.
You don't like a law? You filibuster. Nobody wants a filibuster.
And right now, we have 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans as Supreme Court justices.
Honestly,
it's 4-4.
Honestly, I think the Supreme Court needs to have that balance. I think if you've got 4 Republicans, then I think if some positions come up on the Democrat, I think only Democrats can fill that. I like having a balanced justice with Republican and Democrat, just like a Senate. I like balance. But
the problem is that they do so many decisions that they tend to align with their party. So right now they're deadlocked.
Yeah.
They're deadlocked because they don't have that 9th Supreme Court justice to set the odds. Right. So it's a real problem right now. Hopefully people can get their act together and start cooperating more than not cooperating.
So just to sum up, the Constitution is a living, breathing document. The Founding Fathers wrote it to be that way, to reflect changes and to encourage us to be better than they were. And if you do anything that violates the Constitution, you're punished. And violating doesn't mean disobeying. It also means not doing a thing.
And so we need these Supreme Court justices to help fill in the blanks, so to speak, that we still have in the Constitution and in the amendments to try to help guide us in the direction that the country should be going in. Not necessarily where the Founding Fathers originally said, because that was for their time and place. We need to know for this time and place, right here and right now. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode on the Constitution and the presidential debate, the last of the debates.
Yes! They're over with.
My name is Chris Rex. This is my wife Uriah. If you're interested in finding any of our episodes online, you can just look up Based on Facts on YouTube or Facebook and find them there. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a good one.